The April 11, 2019 meeting of the Williamsburg City Council will come to order. Ms. Bertram, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Maslin.
Here.
Ms. Ramsey.
Here.
Mayor Freiling.
Here.
Vice Mayor Pons.
Here.
Mr. Zhang.
Here.
Before us, we have the minutes from our February 2nd, 2019 annual budget retreat and our February 14th, 2019 and March 11, 2019 work session. Any edits, corrections?
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve as submitted.
Second.
Ms. Bertram, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Maslin.
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey.
Aye.
Mayor Freiling.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons.
Aye.
Mr. Zhang.
Aye.
Today we have one matter of special privilege, and I'd like to ask Mr. Bubba Hockaday to join me at the podium, please. So this is our quarterly Excellence in Service Award for the City of Williamsburg. What makes this award special is that this is recognition by your peers for the tremendous work that you do day in and day out, and their opportunity to thank you for it, and our opportunity to in turn do the same. So I'd like to read this first, if you don't mind. The City of Williamsburg takes pleasure in recognizing Woodrow Bubba Hockaday for excellence in service to Williamsburg. Woodrow Bubba Hockaday has faithfully and effectively served the Williamsburg public for over 13 years. As the equipment operator of the Utility Division of the Public Works Department, he is responsible for maintaining the water and sewer distribution and collection system infrastructure. And if you don't think that's a big deal, try doing without it. He is a key player handling water line breaks, cleaning and repairing sewer lines, making water and sewer service connections, and making expansions to the water and sewer systems. He has spent many long hours at all times of the day and night, and in the most difficult of circumstances, to keep the city's critical utility infrastructure up and running. Bubba is an exceptional employee who has a can-do attitude and takes pride in his work. No matter how difficult or intimidating the work can be, you can count on Bubba Hockaday to be there and take care of business. Bubba Hockaday is hereby recognized for his dedication to excellence in keeping with the best tradition of public service in the City of Williamsburg. April 11th, 2019, and it is signed by me as the mayor on behalf of my fellow members of council and by Mr. Trivette as a city manager. Congratulations.
I had a speech prepared, but all I can say is I'd like to thank my co-workers, my boss, and everyone else in the ground utility and over at the municipal building. It's been a pleasure working for y'all, and kind of a shy guy, so I'm gonna let it go with that. Thank y'all.
We have three public hearings today, the first of which is public hearing regarding the proposed FY20 budget. Mr. Trivette, did you want to start things off?
You know, Mayor, we've talked about the budget quite a bit, so we hadn't really planned to do a formal presentation in advance of the public hearings. We'll just start by saying that on Monday we presented a budget to the City Council that's approximately $68 million for all 6 of the city's funds, and we're happy to receive the public comment and move forward with adoption, hopefully in May.
Any questions for Mr. Trivette before I open the public hearing? Okay, anybody who'd like to address council on this matter, please come forward. And if you could state your name and address and keep your remarks to 5 minutes or less, we would appreciate that. Welcome, Mr. Talley.
Bill Talley, 709 College Terrace. And
While I understand the cost of city government, one thing I'd like to point out that this proposed real estate increase doesn't hit every resident the same way. You have recently stated that the average value of houses is $332,050, I believe it was. But if you look at the downtown and midtown neighborhoods, a lot of those houses are assessed at much higher rates. And with that, we're shouldering a larger version of the proposed tax increases. So it's not the same. And you say that it's not a tax increase, you're keeping the rate the same, but when more comes out of your wallet every year, that's a tax increase. Gentlemen and ladies, I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Talley. Would anybody else like to address the council? With that, I'll close the public hearing and come back to my colleagues for discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I apologize I wasn't here Monday. Feeling much better today, though, and but I guess wanted to start by just congratulating the city manager on his first budget to the city in this position. I think it's reflective of kind of the budget reflects some new vitality in it, and I think that's obviously a hallmark of what Drew brings to the table, so thank you. I guess just a couple thoughts. You know, when we talk about the tourism fund, I heard some conversation about the maintenance of effort funds and how those funds would come back to the city or not and how they worked out. And I just want some clarity and maybe provide some as well. As we know, those funds, that $800,000 goes to the Tourism Alliance. A certain portion of that will be used for the operation and expense of the building and some shared staff. But the funds then go to the Tourism Council. And what the Tourism Council has done is taken the proceeds of the cumulative money that comes from James City County, York County, and we have set that aside in a line item for tourism reserves. Now, it hasn't been defined. There was some conversation there that some folks on the council felt strongly that those funds would be used for tourism product. And I think the part of the argument to doing that was it would help amplify what we're doing here in the city with our own tourism development fund, but there wasn't a consensus, and so at the time we just called it a reserve fund. I would propose that as we, in as much as we can, as a body, as a council, is to say that we want to see those funds go towards tourism product development. And as you pointed out Monday, Mr. Mayor, you know, the reason we started our tourism development fund was to build product, find new ways to bring people to Williamsburg so that we can ultimately help the city's budget so that we can continue to offer the services that we have provided to our residents, and bringing new visitors to town would do that. So I think we ought to, as we send that money to the Tourism Alliance, kind of make that stipulation that we would like to see those funds go towards tourism product. And I realize, you know, once it goes over there, we kind of lose control of it, but I think we ought to still have some influence on that. So I think that's an important thing we ought to try to do. We talked about the utility fund Monday, or you all talked about it while I was laid up. There's currently a balance of 5.9 million, somewhere in that range, and we talked about trying to maintain that. Is there we don't have a policy in our utility fund. Right now, I think it's 100% of what we spend annually, that balance. But the threat of it going down has caused the conversation that at some time in the future we'll have to have a utility increase. And I see that need might be there. But should we develop a policy that mandates how much that fund balance is in the utility fund? Give us some guidance moving forward.
Ms. Dameron and I talked about that a little bit this year as we looked at the utility balance, and the question that she and I were debating was, do you recommend to the city council that we do a rate increase this year, or do we wait? And as we had that debate, we were looking at the rate at which the construction capital balance was decreasing, which is essentially the reserve, which is what you're talking about. And our answer was that we have the opportunity to wait a little bit and see how the new development that's coming online impacts the revenues of the utility fund. That would allow us to sort of adjust what that new rate increase might need to be. It could be nothing if it goes really well. But more directly to answer your question, I think that what we need to do over the next year is look at some other utilities, and that's what we talked about doing, of comparable size, and see what their operational reserve looks like. The difficulty is that there are not a whole lot of utilities that have the age of ours. And so what we're trying to plan for with our balance in utility fund is that catastrophic event that requires quick and complete repair of a large section of pipe.
Sure.
And so having a large balance allows us to do that. And so getting too low would jeopardize that flexibility.
So I understand we don't want to go too low.
Right.
But, I mean, and we don't know what that catastrophic thing may be. And so we don't know whether even that the current balance or any future balance would be enough to fix that. But there's got to be some sort of science, I think, to approach to that, rather than just saying, well, we think it needs to be more, so we're going to raise rates. Because then it seems just a little arbitrary.
Right. Sure.
And I think we all deserve to have a little bit more, a better understanding of those needs and develop a policy that kind of looks at that. What that means, I don't know. But
It's interesting that you use word science, because there's best practices, which is what we're going to look at over the next year, but there's also the science. And so for the last couple of years, we've been working with a company, and the name escapes me, to implement a product that would help us do a better job of analyzing capital needs and risk assessment in the utility department, that would do a better job of forecasting, which is the science part that you're after. We're not there yet, but we're working toward that goal.
and
Question, would it make sense to ask staff to, next year when they come back with a budget, to come back with a recommendation on a policy on utility reserve? And that gives you a fair amount of time for people to do some legwork and come up with, I agree with you about having the rationale in place, so we're not just squirreling away money just to have money.
Right.
It's there for a real purpose, and understanding what that need might be.
And I think then our residents and businesses who pay the utility, have better confidence that we're doing this purposefully rather than just arbitrarily. And not to say that we're arbitrary with the budget at all, but I guess so then outside agencies, I know that we talked about some of the agencies have requested some higher dollars than in this proposed budget, and I agree with most of them. Old Town Medical Center, I think they had asked for an additional $20,000. I'd like to try to find a way to do that, and I think in your presentation Monday, you'd kind of gone through some savings that we'll see, and it left a balance of $97,000. If we can dip into that to fully fund, it would be my recommendation to fund Old Town Medical Center.
So if you can help me, Mr. Trivette, and I don't mean to cut you off.
That's right.
Just so we all understand where we are. When you showed the slides on Monday, there was approximately $123,907 in savings from the regional jail expected costs and school system expected costs. And then of that, I think you listed $4,000 for Colonial Behavioral Health, $4,000 for Old Town, $5,500 for the Colonial Soil and Water Conservation District, $11,000 for Commonwealth's Attorney for the body cam review, and what is this? And $2,400 for the joint courthouse cost increase. Are those things that we need to talk about now and determine whether or not we want those allocated because they're not in the original budget?
That would be most helpful, yes.
And so Mr. Pons is suggesting that even going beyond the $4,000 for Old Town Medical and Dental?
And I say that because I
just
think,
want to make sure we're all on the same page.
and for me, I think there's helping those people in that situation is part of what we do here as a community. And I think $20,000 is a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of things, if we can continue to help provide services to folks in need, I think is a core function of what we do here.
So I think this is the slide Mr. Pons was referring to. So we had available revenue of $123,907. Now, on Monday, I made the point that that was a forecast based on changes that we expected to see before the adoption of the budget. And it was largely based on two sources of revenue. One, an adopted budget by the Virginia Peninsula Jail Board that hasn't happened yet, and an adopted budget by James City County that has not happened yet as it relates to the funding of the school system, right? So as either one of those numbers adjust up or down, this available revenue adjusts up or down. So I expect that James City County in their process will continue to try and massage their budget to increase the amount of funding that they're able to provide to the school system's operating budget. And as they do that, the amount that we have to provide will increase, eroding that number. So I only offer that as the only caveat as to how much we have available to provide.
Sure. And so, and at some point, and historically, when we go through, we'll adopt a budget, and there may be some savings, and we'll see additional revenue that typically go back to the reserve account or in general fund. We have the opportunity to make some budget adjustments, and at that point, we could go back and review some of these outside agencies, and that might be the right time to do that. And so I'll reserve some time later to maybe follow up on some other council members' thoughts.
If I can ask, what is the date that James City County is set to vote on their budget? Well, in other words, will it be before our May meeting?
I believe it's the Tuesday before our Thursday meeting in May.
So then we will know at that point?
If they stick to that schedule, theoretically, yes.
So,
good to have you back.
Thank you.
Mostly echo what the Vice Mayor has stated, and thank you for sharing your thoughts despite your Monday's absence, now that you filled us in with your thoughts on the budget as well. And I appreciate your sentiments about supporting Old Town Medical Center, as well as just in public's interest. I serve as the council liaison to Old Town Medical Center as well. Just general thoughts. I think a lot has been stated already on Monday. I've spoken my bit. The only thing I would say to throw out in the public in terms of the tourism fund, just for the public's consumption, and hopefully maybe we'll get some input as well. When we're talking about tourism product, we have that tourism contingency fund that funds on a case-by-case basis, several special events. And then the question of the policy, do we, allocate the funds towards that contingency fund for just special events, or also you can take it from the general tourism development fund. My general questions and potential issues with it, I'm not opposed to it, but just in terms of evaluating applications on a case-by-case basis, how do you compare, let's say, special event, its successes compared to an application that might support infrastructure, tourism infrastructure, as the Vice Mayor said. I don't know how staff, I hesitate to give an answer to that, but maybe that's something staff should contemplate. Should we have these two, separate funding allocations so that one could be dedicated perhaps to supporting special funding efforts and another just wholly dedicated to tourism funds? That's kind of what the mayor had said on Monday. We're trying to find new revenue sources to encourage and incur a more tax revenue base so that we can go, with the idea of expanding that rather than having to deal with the real estate tax increase or whatnot. So I would just state that because I didn't have a chance to comment that on Monday, or I didn't, so.
Well, I would just like to support the Vice Mayor's position with the maintenance of effort funding that's going to the Tourism Council as far as setting aside for tourism reserve, which could be a way for regional setting aside of funds for regional product. However, that product can be defined, because we've talked often that after so many years, an event such as the Occasion for the Arts that benefits the entire community and region could be considered a product. So I do support that. And I think it sometimes becomes confusing for the public to follow that the city has our own tourism fund, of which the Tourism Development Fund is part of that. And then there's the Tourism Council, which has funds from all of us that are both marketing and the desire now to have a line item for products. So I do support that. And as far as Old Town Medical, I also appreciate the value that they provide to the community, and if there are additional funds that would be available, I would support that. And I would assume that the James City County budget might reflect a change on their participation as well as time goes by.
I think Ms. Dameron has talked to their budget director, but I don't know if she has more information or not.
I really would like to go back and look at my notes. I know there was some discussion about a change in formulas, and I'm not sure if that was Old Town or CBH, where theirs would not be increasing maybe as much as ours might, just because of the change in the formula there. But I'll check that and let Mr. Trivette know.
And to the point earlier made, any of these changes would probably be done after the passage of the James City County budget, so we'll have a better idea of what available revenue will be coming in. So, thank you.
Yeah, once again, I appreciate the new and improved budget process, and especially being able to reconcile projections for expenses and revenue mid-year, and being able to, take a look at additional requests for funding, especially within the public safety arena then. Thank you.
I would suggest that we consider adjusting the proposed budget at this point, because we won't vote on it until May. With the recommendations that you made at the Monday meeting, I don't think I don't think it's responsible not to fund the Soil and Water Conservation District because of that timing issue. The Commonwealth's attorney, it's because we've instituted body cams and they're taking on additional costs for that. I do think the extra $4,000 for Colonial Behavioral Health and for Old Town Medical we should count on doing, and I think wait until we find out the full number from James City County's budget about what flexibility we have in order to do that any additional amount. And I just want to emphasize that even though we're talking about $4,000 or $20,000 for these, that we are funding Old Town Medical and Dental Center already at $89,511 and Colonial Behavioral Health at $255,000. So these numbers would be on top of that.
That's right. This is in addition to that.
So are you all comfortable with that approach?
And did you mention the courthouse?
Oh, no, I didn't, but I meant all of them.
Included
Courthouse too,
that
for
one, too.
$2,400. Are you comfortable with that, Mr. Zhang? Okay, come back to.
Well, and so Mr. Talley made a comment about, an assessment increase is a tax increase, and it is, and that's why we have to advertise it. But I think assessments are based on what's happening in the market. And to have a fair assessment is our goal, and I think our goal, maybe is it to stay within 3 percentage points of. Can you speak to that? Or do we have a policy, or is it a goal?
Yes, actually the assessor is here. We can ask him to come up and talk to us about it. I think at this point, Derek, if you want to come on up, I think at this point, our assessment is at about 94%. The state code allows us to go all the way to 100. Of course, we don't try to go that close. I think historically we've been between 96 and 98%.
So just for clarification, when we say 94%, that means that in aggregate, the city real estate is assessed at 94% of the total 100% market value.
Correct.
So that when a number's below 100%, it means the assessment's lower than what the market says, and if it's higher than, because I just want to make sure people understand that.
True. Our target is 97.5. That's generally where we strive for. Mr. Talley has a great point when it comes to neighborhoods specifically. College Terrace. So you can look at a neighborhood and see how it performed the previous calendar, pardon me, still getting used to the allergies, the previous calendar year, and you can see where maybe statistically it's showing that that neighborhood might need a 5% increase. So he's right. If you go across citywide, you're going to see neighborhoods that are going to go up. You're going to see neighborhoods that are going to go down. But aggregately, yes, you're looking at a 6%. But if you also look at the statistics, a lot of those sales were big chunks. So we had a major apartment community that we were tremendously low on. We had, pardon me, I can't think of the other one, another major commercial project that we had, we were about 52% of the sale price. So between two properties alone, we almost raised almost $12 million. So that's going to make your statistics look a lot worse than what they really are. So when you start digging down to the neighborhood level, you might see a neighborhood that might still go down 1-2%. And it's possible another neighborhood could go up 6 or 7. So it is, Mr. Talley's right, it is going to fluctuate itself annually.
And I know Mr. Talley wasn't implying that it's imposed unfairly, but I think what I wanted to hear, and I think you've done that, is to say there's a science, use that term again, to what you do in the assessor's office, and by looking at comps and what's selling throughout the neighborhoods to figure out what the actual values are, and then create your assessments from there.
Correct. He brings up an excellent point. You know, traditionally, most people only look at the assessment to sales ratio. That provides a number. In our case, it's 94%. To that, you can look at it and say, well, the city's 6% low. That's one statistic, but we actually, moving forward, we're producing 5. So we're going to do the mean, the median, the weighted mean, the PRD, and the COD. When I met with Ms. Dameron when I first started, one of the most troubling, if you will, statistics that we had if we didn't change any of the data was the PRD, that what is called the price-related differential. It kind of goes into Mr. Talley's point. If you looked at our data, we were at 94%, but if you looked at our PRD, we're at a 1.10. Now, the maximum range from IAAO is a 1.03. So what that really suggests is our high-valued properties were not being valued at the same rate as our lower-valued properties. So I have closed that gap for 2020. Statistically, we're at 1.006 as of yesterday. So we've dealt with that issue, which I think was our biggest problem.
Thank you. So that I think it's just important that.
Yeah, I'm not sure what he said either. I'm really encouraged.
I'm running through my PRD.
Appreciate your work on closing the gap, though. I think that's fairly important, and obviously with your background and your expertise are able to locate that. I don't know if any of us could have done that, so we appreciate what you've done.
I think one of the steps that I understand that you've done is to better define neighborhoods so that you can get a more accurate number instead of having in variables within neighborhoods that aren't really neighborhood comparatives.
Correct. When I first started, one of the largest neighborhoods we had was called Jamestown Road. Well, consequently, that made up of Cary, Griffin, and Newport, Indian Springs, Rolfe Road, and
Burns Lane.
Burns Lane, sorry, yes. So that's a large group with varying values and properties, and I would argue different markets entirely. So we've parsed those out, and now statistically, now we can make modifications at that neighborhood level moving forward.
Right. So I think we're making great efforts in that office, and
Thank you.
Seeing the results, and I think it's a fair assessment for our residents and businesses.
As I understand it, you've also upgraded the software and the computer system in the office and added in all the other ABCs, DEFs that you mentioned. So thank you for your efforts. And I think last year, even though we had a tax increase, some of the assessments went down so that people didn't realize the tax increase because of how the assessments adjusted.
Yes.
I speak for myself. So we'll see how things go this year.
Actually, today, we just got delivery of the beta conversion with the new software. So very exciting. So.
Also, you might want to comment on how welcoming the citizens of Williamsburg are.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have spent in this career for 18 years, and I've been invited to more houses in the last week and a half than I have in that stretch. It's great. So we're out there, we're measuring, I'm looking at every single permit. We're going to do a thorough review of every neighborhood as we move forward and use that technology that the city has provided us.
Any other comments on the budget in total? Thank you.
Okay, sure.
Just to your point, Mr. Pons, about, for lack of a better term, message that we send to the Tourism Council about our preference on how the remainder of the maintenance of effort money is to be used. What is the best way for that to actually happen? I mean, you are a representative there,
Right.
so
And
would
so
it be just you coming to the Tourism Council and saying, I've talked to my colleagues?
So I think it's important that maybe the message comes from the mayor or the city manager when we send the check is, here's just a memo from council's intentions on these money, and I think that.
I can write it in the memo line of the check.
Maybe we could actually do a letter to accompany that we sign?
Right. That's probably a better idea, second thought.
That would be very helpful, and I think, I think efforts of the county will be similar to ours.
Good. And to add to that, Mr. Trivette, I think it'd be helpful if we could talk to our counterparts, just to make sure that we're all at least in the same general neighborhood.
Yes, I've talked to administrators numerous times on this subject, and I think that we are.
Anything else?
Yeah, thank you, sir.
So, Mr. Mayor, before we leave this topic, I do want to just make sure that for Ms. Dameron and I's sake, that we're clear on the direction, particularly as it stands for the outside agencies that the staff has suggested. So it sounds like what you'd like us to do is to make the changes that are shown on this slide and then be prepared to make further adjustments to the CBH and Old Town allocations as we have more clarity on the funding that might be
I think it was
available.
just Old Town.
Just Old Town. As we have more clarity on the funding that's available closer to the adoption of
Right,
that.
so there's no guarantee, but
Right.
we're just keeping that option open.
Okay, excellent. We will do that.
Okay.
The only other suggestion that staff made that was part of this presentation had to do with the tourism fund and the request that was made by Williamsburg Live. Did you want to address that?
Tourism contingency.
Yes.
Yeah. Thoughts?
We can see the slide.
I'm working my way back.
Well, and let me, yeah, go ahead. I have a question too.
I was just going to ask a question. So this year we had $150,000.
That's right.
Okay, and it's gone.
It's gone.
And
Reported.
how many applicants made use of that money?
Well, so this year it was a little bit different because you gave out special awards to some of these agencies that are listed here that have transitioned to this list. So Culture Fix was one of them. Williamsburg Live, in its other name, also received an allocation. Occasion for the Arts received an allocation. And then the
Global Film Festival.
The Global Film Festival as well. So those were the ones that benefited last year. So now this year it would be a new pot of money. It's first come, first serve. There are a whole host of applications that we received through the first round of the Tourism Development Grant Fund. And the staff has met. We have reviewed those, at least for eligibility, which is part of the first round review, and identified a whole host. I can't remember the exact number now, but Michelle probably does. 7 that we would recommend apply for tourism contingency if it is funded. And so we are preparing letters to send to those applicants, directing them in that avenue. And those letters will say, if funded through the adoption of the budget, that would become effective July the 1st. So that would be our hope.
So Williamsburg Live, just as a reminder, is the former Fun Fest.
That's
Fun
right.
House.
And
There's
it's
a
Part of the
lineup.
Virginia Arts Festival.
Right. And the lineup has already been established.
That's right.
So,
For this coming year,
right, so this would be for,
the next year.
And they request this money to continue to bring in
headliners.
more well-known performers as headliners.
That's right. Well, in their conversations with us, this money would go toward increasing their ability to pay those fees for contracting the headliners.
so I think for me, I'd like to leave it like it is, have them
Make
come
an
back
application.
and say, you can have A or you can have B.
Okay.
B gets, because it's going to cost the other $20,000. And then there's a tangible
Right.
connection for me.
Certainly.
And as I look at Colonial Williamsburg, I think we've had some great conversations over the last couple of months about marketing and infrastructure and some of their needs. And I look forward to, as we move forward into the future, let me back up and say that I believe that Colonial Williamsburg is a valuable entity in our community and deserves to have this type of contribution, for without them, none of us would likely be here. And so if we can continue to support them with 1.3 million or maybe more in the future, I think it's we have get a positive result out of that, whether it's tourism marketing or product that helps them in their efforts to preserve the historic area and enhance what they have, whatever that looks like moving forward. But I think having that conversation about it being tourism marketing or something else, I look forward to that conversation continuing to evolve.
And I echo what the Vice Mayor said. I think, whether it's reading from the last word or just from conversations with folks, they want to see how are these dollars being used, right? Oftentimes, how we've done it traditionally is they make a presentation without really breaking down the numbers, and then it's approved. So, with whatever discussion that comes out of this budget process or in the future, I think they have presented, last month, and it was really useful for them to break down some of the numbers. Some portion of it was used for grant illumination. That's something I think citizens want to see, and therefore be able to justify, okay, this is how the money's being used. Maybe they'll disagree, maybe they'll agree, but as long as it shows in a transparent manner how this big dole of money is being used out, whether it's for marketing, infrastructure, I think it's vitally important and just fair for our citizens to see as well.
Well, and just to echo on that, just having the performance agreements that we've now instituted with more agencies, and just to the fact of what the Global Film Festival group did on Monday of showing what percentage went to marketing and the effects of that, and then what percentage went for more operational and bringing people in. I mean, just even that breakdown is helpful. So I'm in support of that. And also, I'm sorry, I like Doug's idea on Williamsburg Live or Virginia Arts Festival.
Let me come back to that. Suggesting then, I just want to make sure we're all clear, that we leave it allocated as is with an outside tourism agency funding of $80,000, and then they're able to come in and apply for the additional $20,000 through the tourism contingency fund?
Yes.
Yeah.
And one thing Mr. Trivette and I had talked, Mr. Maslin, you got anything else?
So just following up on the previous conversation, I think it's important that, and I agree with what we've been talking about for CW, it's important that we be able to connect the dots between the use of public funds and the public benefit. Yeah. And I think this is a good way to do that.
Right.
One thing that Mr. Trivette and I talked about earlier, this week, was about the guidelines under the Tourism Contingency Fund, which I think can also apply to this tourism fund. And that was that we didn't have an explicit written expectation that the recipient of the tourism contingency money would come back and give a report on how the money was spent and what were the results that were obtained from that investment. And I think that's something I'd like to see before we get too far into the tourism contingency allocation evaluation process in the coming year, budget year. And that might be the same type of overlay that we can apply to the direct funding through the budget of the outside agencies.
Right, Ms. DeWitt and I have been having a lot of conversations along with Ms. Dameron about the operation of the tourism fund as a whole, as it relates to the application of the tourism contingency policy and the policy for the tourism development grant fund and the overlap there. And it's really been sort of eye-opening, the deficiencies of both. And so you can expect us to be coming back with some suggestions of revisions on both ends. And that's one that we're going to be tightening up.
I think that would address some.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything else? Okay, we'll move on to the second public hearing, which is a public hearing regarding the proposed fiscal year 20 effective tax levy. Mr. Trivette, anything you'd like to say there?
I think we've covered it sufficiently.
Okay. With that, any questions for Mr. Trivette?
No.
So, I have to put my glasses on. This is on the effective real estate tax rate.
That's right.
And so there is no change in the tax rate, but we have to have a public hearing because, as Mr. Talley pointed out, the assessment value has increased greater than 1%, which is a threshold at which the state requires us to have a public hearing.
That's correct.
So at this time, if anybody would like to address council on the tax rate that's proposed for the coming year? Mr. Dell? And again, if anybody wants to address council, if you come forward, state your name and address, and please keep your remarks to 5 minutes or less.
Good afternoon. Bill Dell, 245 North Henry. I'm just here for some clarification. I'm confused. Looking at the article in the newspaper, the proposed real property tax increase, and then, in one of the publications you put out, it said, fortunately, the city will experience revenue increases to balance the additional demands that we have. I've always been a big fan of council and the way we spend our money ever since I started here 20 years ago. And I'm just a little bit confused as to how this works. You just made the statement, Paul, that the tax rate's going to be the same. Well, if you increase the tax rate from 57 to 60, and you also increase by 6% the assessed value of your property, it seems to me like that's a double hit, and you're certainly going to be paying a lot more than you would be paying if you were just having the tax rate increased, or the assessment increased by 6% and no tax rate increase. Again, could someone clarify that for me? I don't understand. And
Sure.
The other thing is I don't understand the need for the additional money. If there's a real need for it, fine. But again, with the budget that you submitted, it seems like everything is covered, with the current real estate assessment increase. It seems to me like that the funds that we need are there, and that's why I'm confused.
And we'll cover that in our discussion.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Mr.
Thanks.
Dell. Anybody else? Okay, with that, I'll close the public hearing. Mr. Trivette, to Mr. Dell's question, my understanding is that there is no increase in the tax rate. The reason we're having this hearing is because the overall assessed value of the community's combined real estate property increased. We're projecting 4.5?
At this point, we're expecting 5.7.
And what are we budgeting for?
Projected.
4.
4, okay. So we're budgeting a 4% increase in the overall value of real estate in the community. We're projecting it'll be somewhere around 5.7.
That's right.
But we are not changing the tax rate. It is staying the same per $100 as it has been. So there is.
57.
No, 6.
0.60.
Ms. Dameron?
The state prescribes exactly the wording we have to use in that advertisement, and the 57 cents that's mentioned in the advertisement is what we would have to roll the rate back to in order to keep the revenue level with what it was last year. Our rate right now is at 60 cents per 100. That's what we're recommending we stay at. But in order to make it revenue neutral.
That's right.
So that is the first half of Mr. Dell's question. The second half is what has changed on the expense side that requires this additional money? And I know we talked about some of this on Monday, but if you could just give a very brief rundown of some of the key areas.
Sure. Some of the key expenses are the cost for education have increased. We talked about that considerably. The school system has increases associated with their personnel. As you know, you probably saw the governor proposed an increase for teachers of 5%. The school system's proposed increase is 4%, and our share of that overall increase operationally is approximately 10%. And so that's an increase in our operational budget. To meet that need, we need additional revenue. Additionally, we had to increase our cost for recycling, $175,000 as a result of the increase in the contract cost that we're a party to. There are increases in the departmental needs. They're not increases in what the departments are spending per se. What we did was we had to increase what was budgeted to match what was being spent already, because in past years those numbers were artificially lowered, resulting in those lines coming up negative at the end of the fiscal year. So all three of those big ticket items resulted in the need for additional revenue. Then the last thing that really drove expenses are personnel increases on the city side as well.
And do you want to talk to the hope that we'll be able to increase public safety personnel?
Sure. So as we said, the expectation is that the actual increase in the assessed value of the city will be 5.7% in average, but we have budgeted for 4%. The difference in revenue between the 4% and the 5.7 will be known in December. And so at the city council meeting in the January-December timeframe, we will come back to city council and report on the actual revenue that's expected at the end of the fiscal year and ask them to allocate that funding. There's a slide that we showed on requests that were made during the budget process that we were unable to fulfill because we did not have the revenue. The top two requests were funding to provide for 4 positions in the fire department and 4 positions in the police department. Those would be our top priorities in December if there is additional funding. And so we would take that additional funding that's resultant from that difference between what we have budgeted for and what is realized in the assessed value and apply it toward those new positions that are needed.
I would just like to say with the recycling cost, based on our presentation, why it has exploded in terms of its cost is not necessarily because the company just wants more revenue. It's because of certain foreign policy decisions that were made that has resulted in the largest consumer of the recyclable goods, China, that is apparently refusing to buy some of the recyclable goods all across the United States, therefore demanding an increased operational expense for the company that we contract with, and that's why it has resulted in a higher price for us in order to do recycling. Is that a fair way of putting it?
That's absolutely fair. I mean, I don't.
Without all the jargon that
Sure,
a presenter had. But.
I mean, I think you can go as far as to say that, you know, in this country right now, we're in a recycling crisis. Because at a municipal level, there are local governments all over this country right now that are considering eliminating their recycling programs entirely because they can't afford them. And the reason they can't afford them is because there's no longer a buyer for the recycled goods. And so it's sort of a crisis of, is there still a market for recyclable products in America?
And despite the spike in the cost based on the presentation we had several months ago, my understanding, one of us had posed the question that this still is among the lowest that they tried to find in terms of, despite the price spike. This is probably the lowest and cheapest option that remains, at least for this peninsula region, if that's correct.
It was actually lower, significantly lower than what we expected when we released the RFP.
Right.
And even with all of that, we will not be able to recycle the same range of materials that we currently do.
Right.
That's right.
That's going to shrink because there is no market for those.
And that's the whole thing. I mean, there's a market for some things, but it's primarily the paper. And just to clarify on the assessment too, your tax bill will go up only if your assessed value goes up. So there will be some neighborhoods where it will go up none, 1%, and then based on what Derek said, some of the commercial properties could go up 10%. So it won't really be known what that change is until the tax man cometh.
The city has a policy, correct me if I'm wrong, to do assessment reevaluations every year.
That's right.
For example, James City County does it every other year.
That's right.
So from a standpoint, if you do it every other year, there could be a significant bump, which could be more burdensome to some homeowners. Conversely, I guess if it goes down, you have to wait 2 years, then you don't get to take advantage of that. But I think by doing it every year, any increases that we may have are slowly assessed.
Well, again, the advantage of doing it every year is if the rates go down, you see it right away as opposed to having to wait till the second year to see it.
And just in terms of number, maybe, Ms. Dameron, if the 4% increase in valuation equates to about $600,000, is that?
I want to say we are at about 400 is what we have increase in the budget. And then we would look to up to about 220, I think, if we hit the 5.7.
Mr. Pons, just to be clear, the reason that the math that you're doing is based on, we always talk about when we predict a tax increase, we always talk about what 1% represents. And so we do the calculation on that. And that's a true collection, right? So that would be everybody pays 100%. What Ms. Dameron is saying is that this budget is very conservative, and so we have predicted what we think we will collect, and so that's why it's only 400.
Right. And I just reverse math. If the state says we could reduce it to 57, that would be 3 percentage points, and so $197,000 times 3 is essentially $600,000.
Question, just an update on the recycling. So when we had the presentation, basically the numbers we were looking at was based on all the other jurisdictions approving that. Has that happened at this point?
It has.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other discussion on that?
Public hearing's still open.
Yeah.
I don't think you did.
Okay, sure. Mr. Dell, if you come to the microphone, please.
Clarification. I have a $500,000 piece of property that's assessed last year at $500,000. This year, with a 6% increase, then that would be, what, $530,000 of the new assessed value of my property. If the assessed value of the property is taxed at 57 cents per hundred, as it is now.
It's 60 cents per hundred.
It was passed last fiscal year.
No, it's 57 unless they change it. Has it changed to 60
Changed
now?
last year.
The tax rate was changed last year.
Okay, that answers my question, and I don't have a question. I thoroughly agree with your budget. I think it's great, and I'd like to go on record as saying we still get more for our tax dollar in the city of Williamsburg than I know of any other place that I've lived, and I've lived in 25 different communities. So I don't have a problem with that, but I was just really confused, and I apologize because I thought we were still at 50 or 57 cents, not 60 cents. So I don't have anything else to say.
Thank you, Mr. Dell. Would anybody else like to address council on this? We have one more public hearing, so, okay. With that, we'll close the public hearing. Any other discussion? Our third public hearing today is regarding the proposed FY20 utility rate and budget. Mr. Trivette, anything you'd like to?
The only thing I'll say this time, having learned my lesson from the last one, is that the utility rate will not be changing.
With that, I'll open the public hearing. Anybody who'd like to address council on the proposed lack of change to the utility rate? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Any discussion? We'll move on to reports. Monthly financial statement, anything you'd like to highlight?
Ms. Dameron and I reviewed the financial report, and I think we're still on track, and she's prepared to cover it if you all are interested in hearing about it. Otherwise, I think it stands as presented.
Questions or comments?
Any red flags? I know that maybe you still don't have all the bells and whistles in the new program, but
I wouldn't say so much red flags. We definitely have situations where we can expect our revenues to be over budget. Case in point with that would be our business license tax. We're already over $200,000 over budget. I don't expect that to change substantially. We will have a couple of places that are going to be under budget. I think if I wanted to draw your attention to anything, as we pointed out in the budget message, we're not expecting a large over budget in revenues, and we're not expecting a large under budget in expenses. So very minimal increase to the reserves from the general fund. When you look at the capital improvement fund, we have a budget of $4.4 million for the year. Right now, I believe we're trending about 7% ahead of budget. And we have a unique situation where we've had to date about $69,000 in transfers out that we received that should have gone to another jurisdiction. But we've also had about 40-some thousand in transfers in. So we're down about 20. The good news is we know we have another 152,000 transfers in, meaning taxes that went to another locality that will be receiving in Williamsburg. I know of one transfer that will occur transfer out. Unfortunately, I'm not aware of the amount, nor do I know when that will hit. Now, if we continue the trend and we do at least as well in the spring with spring activity as our sales receipts as we did last year, we're trending to hit maybe 4.8 or 4.9 million. So that would be between, 3 and 400,000 400,000 to 500,000 over budget. My concern is that there are transfers out that may occur that we're not aware of, and the question will be, will they hit before year end or after year end? And the concern being that if they occur after June 30th, that could make it appear that we're really increasing our reserve when we combine the general fund and the sales tax fund, only to see it go back out the door in the upcoming year. So that would be my one red flag.
Also, as we have said, as we've covered the budget, one of the adjustments, actually one of the large adjustments in the expenses was to adjust budgetary numbers in each of the departments back to historic spending levels to cover shortfalls in individual lines. And so as we near the end of this budget year, we're monitoring lines that are going to be short. And so what happens is, as we get closer to the end of June, Ms. Dameron and I are moving money around inside those departments, inside the general fund, to cover those deficiencies. And so as we do that, the expected surplus decreases.
Okay, anything else? Monthly departmental operating reports, anything you'd like to highlight?
No.
Questions for Mr. Trivette?
No.
City manager report. We have the Neighborhood Balance Committee report.
Yes. So Ms. Murphy and I have been working on this GIO and wanted to get it started. And so we've made some significant progress in terms of putting together the structure, identifying potential members, and I wanted to report out on where we were. So in the GIOs this year, there are a number of these types of work groups, and we're structuring them as city manager work groups for the purposes of presenting them to council. Ms. Murphy has put together sort of this initial outline that was presented in the packet, and I think she's done a remarkable job. What she's done is outline kind of matching with the GIO description, which the council put together, who would serve, meaning the types of representatives that need to be there, but most importantly outlined the structure of the 9 meetings that we sort of envision that need to be accomplished. And so we've identified that 2 meetings would kind of cover the orientation and background. And while that seems like a sort of boring task, it's critically important, because you've got people coming from sort of all walks of the community that need to be brought up to speed so that they're all operating from the same level of knowledge before we start really considering ways to solve a very particular problem. Then we would move on to a critical component, which is the Architectural Review Board. And we will talk about it from 2 perspectives. Number one is, what is its function? What's the purpose of the Architectural Review Board? And benefit. And then we will talk about what is its impact. And so the question is, particularly, what is the dollar value that the Architectural Review Board represents on average to a typical home in one of the corridor protection districts or ARB review districts? A difficult question to answer, to be sure, but we're going to do our best to try and tackle it. And then meetings 3 to 6 are going to be, I think, particularly interesting. And we're going to start to look at sort of those best practices across the Commonwealth for other college towns. We're going to inquire of our colleagues in the planning departments and the city manager's offices to look for how they're handling housing issues as it relates to students and residents, and the conflicts that exist between the two, as it particularly relates to affordability. So we're anxious to see what we can learn there from our colleagues. Step 7 is to develop the recommendations, 8, finalize those recommendations, and then step 9 is to present the recommendations to City Council. We have already identified a facilitator for this work group. It's Susan Gaston, who will be on the work group representing the Realtors Association. And she is, I think, an excellent choice to be the facilitator because she has a wealth of experience in bringing people together in consensus. She has recently served on the James City County Affordable Housing Task Force, so she's got a wealth of knowledge already and is anxious to get started. One of the issues that we're already sort of wrestling with is the fact that we want a broad selection of interested parties to be represented in this work group, including the students themselves. And that sort of brings with it the challenge of when do you start the work? Because we are nearing the end of the semester and the students will go away for the summer and it'll be very difficult for us to have a meeting while they're not here, depending upon who is selected by the students to serve. So we have 2 student positions on the work group. They've not been selected yet, but once they are, we will have to deal with whether or not they're in Williamsburg over the summer, and if they are not, that may delay the start of the work group until the fall, which likely would not be a bad thing. It would actually give staff more time to do some of the preliminary research in advance and allow us to be better prepared to move this along when the fall does arrive.
2 words for you: summer school.
That's right.
Does wonders. So if I can just add to that, we do a lot of things through city government that have an impact on neighborhoods. We like to think that most of the things we do have positive impacts, but we have a lot of different things that work sometimes in opposition to each other. We set up zoning, we have parking regulations, we have architectural review board guidelines, we have, through the zoning, we also have rental regulations. We've recently instituted or implemented a policy on Airbnb. We're interested in workforce and affordable housing. And so all those different forces have their own impacts. When you put on top of that, we don't know exactly what's going to happen in the neighborhoods. And a lot of these are the neighborhoods directly surrounding the college. But it's not only those neighborhoods. What happens when the Midtown Road development opens? I think the college has some questions about what that's going to do to their impact on their housing stock and what's it going to do to impact our neighborhoods. And so understanding as much of that as we can in advance will help us be better prepared when that happens. And I very much look forward to what this group is able to come forward with and recommend. I had 2 questions, if you don't mind. First, thank you, Mr. Trivette. I think this is a very timely matter, and not to say that it's been an ongoing effort with our predecessors on this dais. It's just one of those dynamics, given that we're a college town, we have CW, and given, just the nature of our city, it's always going to be an ongoing conversation. But with what you had mentioned, Mr. Mayor, it does seem like this group is coming in a very timely fashion. With that, my first question, Mr. Trivette, is this. This is a work group. I don't know if it's subjected to public meeting requirements, open meeting requirements, but I'm sure there are a lot of residents. I know some in my neighborhood, the Burns Lane Residents Association. Barb has worked very closely hand in hand with them. My neighbors, I'm sure a lot of them there are a lot more interested members that might be wanting to provide some sort of input that may not be in this work group. So what is the best way? I know that hasn't been established yet, but what could be, in terms of a preview, the best way to get their input into the process as well?
I think that's an excellent question. So this will not be a public body, which is because it's a city manager's work group.
Understood.
It'll function very similarly to how we handled the food truck work group. And the way that the food truck work group handled that issue was after they had had several meetings, they said, we want to pause here and take input from interested parties. And so they had a meeting where they opened it up and they took public comment from 2 people who felt very passionate about the issue. I expect that this group may choose to do the same thing. I can't say for certain because we've not had the first meeting yet, but that's something that we would need to consider as a group.
And I noticed in this list, very inclusive, didn't mention Neighborhood Council of Williamsburg, but I'm sure there's overlap with members who are part of that organization but also are interested. But I know you give updates, and perhaps they may appreciate those updates when they meet as well. And finally, I know it's addressing affordability within the context of neighborhood balance, and that's greatly appreciated. I know there's also been an interest in establishing an affordable housing task force. Now, is that going to be different, or are you kind of envisioning this to be the same?
Yeah, it's a very important distinction because
Because it's mentioned here, I just wanted to
Right.
kind of scope
And
it out a little bit.
There's no good word for it, unfortunately, but what we're talking about with this work group, when we mention affordability, is affordability from the standpoint of a professional working family affordability. And so that has a very different meaning than affordable housing that's income restricted. Or workforce housing.
Right.
And so when we talk about the GIO that is dealing with affordable housing, we're talking about income restricted housing.
Okay.
And that's a very different application.
Thank you for clarifying.
Oh, just to clarify that one point further. When you say professional, you don't necessarily mean two doctors. It could be a teacher married to a city employee.
Or it could be a single person.
Right. Okay, go ahead.
The only thing I was going to say is I noticed my neighborhood is not listed. So I would like, since we are close to campus, both the Griffin Cary Newport and also Indian Springs.
Right, so not every neighborhood is represented, and that's because, we wanted to keep the work group manageable. So what we did was we tried to take a selection of people that represent various neighborhoods, but not every neighborhood is on the list.
But the information discovered will be disseminated to all neighborhoods that are impacted.
Just to the point with the neighborhood council, yeah.
Did you?
Yeah, so the last planning commission meeting I went to, there was a discussion about the college changing requirements for who needs to live on campus and moving from just freshman to freshman and sophomore. And there was some confusion among the people who represent the college as to had that happened. Do we have any updates on that? Is that being implemented?
It's fall of 2020.
Okay.
It's with the incoming freshman class.
So it won't affect us.
Or isn't it? I thought it was happening with this incoming class, but you might be right. Because I know it did not impact them in this current housing lottery, but I thought it would in next year's.
Well, you're right. So the freshmen who are coming in this year will need to stay on campus.
As sophomores in 20. Right.
But if they're a freshman this year, they were eligible to move off.
Okay.
I think they didn't want to change the rules.
Because people had already committed.
Right. By the time it happened, it had already.
That's how I understood the policy as well.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, thank you, Mr. Trivette. Now we can move on to unfinished business, of which we have none unless anybody wants to bring some up. We have new business. We have 4 items today. The first is consideration of an amendment to Section 2-140 of the City Code, allowing either the Director of Human Services or Deputy Director within the Human Services Department to serve as the Division of Social Services Director. Ms. Shelton.
So back in the early 90s, the city changed from a model where there was a board of social services to a social services advisory body, and the Department of Human Services Director was appointed as the law allows a local government official to serve in what is effectively the Director of Social Services role. So he currently wears the hat of Human Services Director and the Director of Social Services. We thought it was appropriate to give council some additional flexibility within the department. Obviously, that position needs to be staffed by a local official who understands what they're doing in the role of Director of Social Services. And so the amendment to the ordinance provides that either the Human Services Director or one of the deputy directors can be appointed by City Council to fill the role of Social Services Director, adding the deputies to that list.
So this is not necessarily a new staffer position. This could be relegated to one of the existing.
This is not a new staff position. This is designating an individual within the department to basically be that liaison for purposes of the State Department of Social Services.
And we're just creating the flexibility to
That's
do that
correct.
at this point.
Thank you.
Questions, conversation? No? do I have a motion?
So I move that City Council adopt proposed ordinance 1906.
Second.
Well, and I guess I further, within the same sentence, and further move that City Council appoint Wendy Evans as interim director of the Division of Social Services effective May 1, 2019.
Second.
Ms. Burcham?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Freiling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
Mr. Mayor, before we move on, I'd like to also take this opportunity to announce that
Hey,
Ms.
wait, okay, go ahead, I'm sorry. But you go ahead, Mr. Trivette, if you're so anxious.
Sorry.
Gentlemen.
I am a little anxious to announce this. Ms. Evans has graciously agreed to serve as the interim director of Human Services when Mr. Wallentis retires on May the 1st.
So now that you've broached that subject, and I know this is probably going to draw some ire from wonderful city employees, namely Mr. Wallentis, but this is your last city council meeting?
I believe it is. It doesn't mean I may not be sitting in the back for future meetings.
Well, we'll look forward to hearing from you in open forum, but Mr. Wallentis, I just wanted to take this opportunity on behalf of the residents of the City of Williamsburg, whom you have served so remarkably well for so many years, to thank you for everything that you have done, not only as through the Human Services Department, but also your Herculean efforts to also lead the redevelopment and housing authority efforts on an interim basis that dragged out interminably. So just on behalf of everybody in Williamsburg, we just can't say thank you enough. And we would have a party, but we have to finish the meeting.
But we can't applaud.
Mr. Mayor and Council, everything I had to say was in my letter to you, which I believe is a public document, and it was heartfelt, and I think that sums it all up. Thank you.
And I'd just like to say, Chief Dent, your turn is coming. So, now moving on to the next item of new business, consideration of an amendment to section 18-382 of the Code of the City of Williamsburg, adding new taxable amounts for distillers, breweries, and retail on-premises beer licensing, making the city code consistent with the Code of Virginia.
Mr. Mayor, this matter really is housekeeping. The Commissioner of Revenue's office pointed out to me that there have been some changes in the Code of Virginia with respect to licensing certain alcoholic beverage businesses. The three that are primarily affected in this ordinance are distillers license. So currently the city code provides for a license fee of $1,000 for distillers, and that has actually been bifurcated so that if you produce more than a certain number of gallons, it's $1,000 a year, and it's reduced as the number of gallons that you produce is reduced. The same is true with breweries, and also there is a reduction of the license tax for wineries, which is pretty significant, although we don't, as far as I know, have any wineries in the city. These are maximum amounts provided in the state code, and so our ordinance has to be consistent with them. This just makes our ordinance provisions consistent with the state code.
And there was no state action related to meaderies?
No, there wasn't. There has been some change this year that will take effect in July, so this is not the last time you're going to see this, unfortunately.
Okay. Questions, comments?
Mr. Mayor, I move that City Council adopt proposed ordinance number 19-07.
Second.
Ms. Burcham?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Freiling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
And Mr. Mayor, if I could, all of these license taxes were reductions, and so there was no public hearing required for City Council to take this action.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Shelton. This takes us to our third item under new business, consideration of a budget amendment for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2019, proposed resolution number 19-05. Ms. Dameron?
Yes, this is a resolution that allows us to receive grant funds and expend those funds. We're asking for an increase in the general fund of $15,960. This is to grants for enforcement of alcohol and speeding violations, and also a Pet Safe brand grant for dog park upgrades. And then in the Public Assistant Fund, we're asking for an increase of $161,974. $159,300 is to address a workforce grant, and $2,671,000 is various state grants, and basically that's for overtime to address Medicaid expansion and also foster care review. And then the law enforcement block grant, we're asking for an increase of $2,240, and that's for bulletproof vest grants, I should say.
And so again, the purpose of this is to allow us to accept the grant money, put it into the budget, and then expend it for the express purposes of the grant.
That's correct.
Okay. Questions or comments?
No, and I think your point is important. We're not taking existing dollars out of our budget to support these things, and not that they're not worthy, but we have received funds, and so we're just dispensing them. Mayor, unless somebody else.
No, please.
Mr. Mayor, I move that resolution 19-05 be approved consistent with staff recommendation.
Second.
Ms. Burcham?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Fryling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons? Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
This takes us to our last item of new business, consideration of an amendment to Section 18-26 of Chapter 18, Article 2 of the Williamsburg Code to adopt an alternative method of filing personal property tax returns for motor vehicles, trailers, and boats pursuant to Code of Virginia 1950 as amended, Section 58.1-3518.1. Ms. Overy.
Hi, thank you. This is, we reported out at our last report to City Council about a change that we were going to make in our office not to mail personal property renewal documents to households regarding confirming their vehicles, because the DMV is now providing us with weekly updates. So when a vehicle is sold or purchased, we're notified and we update our records at that time. This practice was implemented about 8 years ago, but our process never updated with the practice. So we wanted to eliminate the mailing, and we had already presented that to you all. And then I recently learned that the code had to match the state code allowing us to do it. So all we're doing is adding one sentence to the code, clarifying that we can file by exception, which means a resident will need to notify us, but they're not required to submit an annual certification for their vehicles.
Do you have, just in rough terms, a ballpark estimate of what that saves?
It's about 8,000 pieces of mail that we send out, and then we have to process in the office, so it's a significant amount of time as well as money, but about $5,000 to $6,000 just in the mailing, plus staff time, and we probably spent about, it takes us about 4 months to go through all of them and enter all of that data into the computer to check everything. And then the other challenge is we weren't able to then verify that everybody had submitted it. And if you don't submit it, there's actually a code that says you should be charged a penalty, and we had not been doing that. So this is cleaning up all of our processes and being consistent going forward.
I think it makes sense to be more efficient in everything that we do, and if the benefit is saving money, then all the better. So thank you for bringing this forward.
I think since you've been coming to the office, you've been identifying efficiency. So again, we appreciate what you're doing, your efforts with that goal in mind. And also interesting that DMV is very efficient on this as well, giving you weekly reports. That's not been my experience trying to get a license. But if the DMV is working out for you guys, then that's great.
Maybe it depends on how many parking tickets you get.
Going down that rabbit hole, huh?
Question.
So,
So,
Go ahead, Mr. Maslin.
just following up on neighborhood council question about, has the county stopped their mailing also?
Yes, I actually can't find another locality that is still doing it, so.
Okay, thank you. If Jim Joseph's listening.
Do I have a motion?
I move that City Council adopt proposed resolution proposed ordinance 19-08.
Second.
Ms. Burcham?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Fryling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
Any other new business? Well, that brings us to the conclusion of our business, and with that, we will open the open forum. I have one speaker's card, Mr. Gary Shelley. And again, during open forum, if the speakers would identify themselves with their name and address, and please keep your comments to 5 minutes or less. Welcome, Mr. Shelley.
I am Gary Shelley. I live at 205 Indian Springs Road, and I have a prepared a message here that I'd like to give. But first, I'd like to address a couple things we heard earlier. I'd like to say I'm in complete agreement with Mr. Dell that I feel we get a lot of value for the 60 cents rate that we have. I also want to commend you, Mr. Mayor, and the others on council for responding to Mr. Dell. A citizen who had a concern, he came to you, and it was responded to, I believe, to his satisfaction. And that sort of behavior certainly imparts confidence to citizens like me who might have a concern of other things in the future. I've been speaking in open forum with regularity the past few months, and I intend to speak only twice more next month. And hopefully, after that, my appearances will be few and far between. I understand the enormity of the responsibility and the complexity involved in running a local government. And I have great respect for those of you who serve on council and those who work for the city. And I hope my appearances will help guide you as you make critical decisions impacting the future of Williamsburg. I have made clear my support for William & Mary students. Students want to be recognized and welcomed as citizens and neighbors. Unfortunately, our city council in recent years has sent unmistakable signals that the interests of a small number of their supporters outweigh the interests of students. This must change. This is the reason I have been appearing with regularity at our meetings. And I hope that my appearances will impact your attitudes regarding the inclusion of students as a vital, integral part of our community. Your actions will speak louder than your words. In neighborhoods close to the college, residents have made clear that they do not want students to live among them. These residents feel that they have some inherent right to the neighborhoods that students don't deserve. They voice their opposition to students, both privately and publicly. Their words are ugly and divisive. This makes me very sad. And these town-gown tensions are destructive to a healthy, vibrant community. I want to read a portion of a letter from self-described proud parents of 2 William & Mary students. We were subjected to some really mean-spirited and derisive comments from our daughters and neighbors, and embarrassing venting and ranting about having to live near college students. It was mostly anti-student diatribes, stereotyping, and unsubstantiated whining that was so openly false that no attempt to refute was necessary. This hostility that some Williamsburg residents have towards college students is not a good representation of the city. Williamsburg is a beautiful park-like city, a historical treasure, and home to a very great institution. Williamsburg needs to begin the process of healing in the community and establishing better relations between the neighbors and the students in the residential area. The William & Mary students who live out in the community will remember more than just all the academic stuff that they learned between Jamestown and Richmond Roads. We might all see that we have an opportunity to ratchet down the rhetoric and emotion and demonstrate some civility and citizenship. And they conclude their letter with, best wishes to everyone. I've sat through many city council sessions. I've listened to discussions regarding vibrancy. I've watched as you have listened patiently, hour after hour, to concerns ranging from myriad subjects, such as our schools, our businesses, and our budget. It's apparent that you invest much time and effort into attempting to maximize the city's potential. I implore you to find a way to better include William & Mary students as welcomed and treasured members of our community. They are, after all, our greatest asset. You can do this. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Shelley. Would anybody else like to address council? Seeing no one, close the open forum. I believe we may have something for closed session.
In fact, we do. I move to go into closed session pursuant to section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia for the purpose of discussing two personnel matters per subparagraph 1 concerning interviews, appointments to boards and conventions.
Second.
Ms. Burcham?
Mr. Maslin?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Fryling?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Mr. Zhang?
Aye.
Council will take a brief recess and reconvene in closed session.